Hey gang, Raj here. Hope everybody's doing well out there. Usual caveat these days, I've got a bit of a speech impediment from cancer treatment, but I'm doing okay, and thank you for folks that have reached out and expressed their concerns and prayers and best wishes and all that good stuff. It really means a lot. Appreciate it. Today, kind of a Helix video, which I haven't done in a while, but really not specific to Helix. This is kind of a philosophy of building patches in modelers, plugins, anything that you have that kind of granular control over. I think it can be pretty overwhelming for folks who've never done it before, and even for us seasoned pros, it can still kind of be a mystery. I haven't been playing much live, a lot of medical stuff, and before that, you know, the world ended. So I think it's great every once in a while to reaffirm your process in building patches and getting to where you want to be as quickly, as efficiently as possible without losing your mind. And so I'm going to go through my process and kind of what I do. Okay, so what I've got going on here is this relatively inexpensive guitar from Belvin, which is kind of my offshoot brand from Blevins Guitars. A little cheaper import stuff. I'm going into a UA interface. Now, ideally, what I'd be doing if this was to prep for a gig is use my actual Helix or whatever you have. I've got a Tone X here. I've got a few of those modelers. Doesn't really matter. Same process, depending on the kind of software that's available for that modeler. Today I'm using the Helix plugin, but it's the same process as if I was using the actual floorboard. The only difference is I'd be plugged into the Helix, coming out of the Helix, left and right into my interface, and I would still set Logic up in the way I have it set up. So on the channel that I'm plugged into right now, I have a channel EQ, I have a stereo Helix plugin, and I have a channel EQ. Both of those channel EQs are set to 0. They're not doing anything to the sound. They're only there to demonstrate the change in tone. You have a visual aid here to kind of help you understand what's going on with the sound. You know, you have harmonics, you've got boosts, and you have cuts. All these things are going to have a visual representation, and I'm all for using whatever tool I have at my disposal to get the job done. So let's jump in. I'm going to try to keep everything on this single line here in Helix, which basically means that anything we come up with today would probably run on a Pod Go or one of the smaller Helix units and not use a ton of processing power. I have a few blocks that I know that I use. Almost every patch I use these days, I use these blocks. I'm going to go through them one at a time and give you the reason why I'm stacking them in that way and putting them where I'm putting them. So the first thing we're going to do is just listen to this guitar without anything on the patch. This is the neck position. And this is the fourth position, neck and middle. Why is that important? You need to understand the difference between your guitars, especially if you're using multiple guitars on a gig. You need to understand the difference in output, general output, and the kind of the tonal differences, especially between humbuckers and single coils or P90s or some other type of pickup. It can be wildly different, and so if you're trying to come up with one patch to rule them all, it's an uphill battle. You've got so many changes that are going to happen when you plug that other guitar in. Can be done for sure, and sometimes it's fun to go down that road, but regardless, I think it's a great idea to understand the tone of the pickups without amplification before you start. So now that that's out of the way, I'm going to put an amp on, and I literally am just going to start at the very beginning. This is the first amp that is in Helix. It's not a go-to amp for me. I don't know it very well. I just want to demonstrate that the process is kind of the same no matter what. And chances are my tone is going to come out with this amp very close to any amp that I pull up because I have a certain sound in my head that I'm going for. So once the amp is pulled up and I put it in the third spot, because generally speaking, I'll use either a boost or a compressor up front or some kind of distortion pedal or overdrive up front, so I know, you know, I can move this later, but the third spot in is usually a good spot for me. So I'm just gonna see where we're at. Now I can already tell a few things about this amp This amp is, relatively clean right off the top, and I'm looking at the difference between the EQs, and I can kind of tell what it's doing and what it's not doing. Guitar amps don't and aren't supposed to amplify everything cleanly across the board. They're going to emphasize certain harmonics and certain registers, and it's your job to figure out if you like that or not. In Helix, this amp block is both the amp and the cab. So I can go to this tab and it'll show me that I've got a 57 dynamic, pretty much right on the cone. If I'm using an IR, it's very likely because I know the sound of that IR. I've used it before and I'm plugging it into a type of amp that I know it works well on. For the sake of this video, I feel like using the cab emulation is actually more helpful because it'll show us all of the different methods that we have to kind of tailor the sound, especially as we get closer and closer to our sound and our attention to detail is getting more and more minute. Back on the amp, I'm going to basically go through every single control and see where that control is. I'm back in the neck position here. So I'm just literally taking that fader and seeing where the bass is. I'm going to do the same thing to everyone. Now I can look at my EQs and see kind of where things are getting the biggest boost. Mid is circled around 1K, 1.5K. Depends on the amp. But that's definitely around 1K-ish. Treble, 3K, 4K, gets a real big bump. And presence, 4K and up. You don't have to start with EQ, you can start anywhere you like to start. I generally know where a lot of these EQs lie, so I will usually start with the drive and the volume and master. So in the case of this Watt 100, I'm going to bring the master all the way up. I want to see how much gain that gives us. Yeah, and that's not really pushing us into too much overdrive there. So I'm going to leave that all the way up. And then I'm going to start bringing this drive up. What I'm after is just to edge a break up. I want, when I really dig in, I want that to just barely start breaking up on me. So I'll go just past 5. Maybe it's important to say at this point, I realize this tone right now, to my ears anyway, is very harsh. It's not where I'd stay. And it might seem a little strange that I'm not going straight to an EQ or to try to fix that problem. But I don't know the amp yet. I don't know what this drive does. The gain structure of the amp is going to affect everything else. So I'm going to continue to push this drive a little bit. As I push that drive, it's getting more and more harsh. So I'm going to stay right there for now at 5.8. Now, I've already got the treble down at about 3.2 is what it says, and mids are less than 5. That's already quite a bit off of the high end of this amp. I don't really want to try to fix this harshness with the tone stack. So I'm going to go over to the speaker and see what we can do there. Now, I know a 57 is a pretty harsh mic. It's pretty forward for a guitar amp. It's why we like it a lot of times. And the position they have this in, being right on the cone and going in at a 45-degree angle, is one of the most forward or mid-forward positions we can put it in, right? So first thing I'm going to do is just change the mic. I know that a ribbon mic or a larger dynamic's going to give me a better tone. And I do have a couple go-tos that I like in Helix. The 160. So already 57. And the 160. So that's a pretty massive difference in tone already. I'm going to move this over a bit off of the cap. I'm going to leave the distance at 1 inch, and I'm going to turn this angle to 0 degrees. So it's basically right between the edge and the cap. Periodically, I'm going to check the 4th position. Those are the 2 positions I use the most on this Strat for rhythm playing. I don't hate it. It's kind of getting there as a basic tone. Now you got to be realistic. We haven't added reverbs. We haven't added compression. We haven't really done any of the fun stuff. So just keep that in mind. If you're hitting your DAW, your Logic, Pro Tools, GarageBand, whatever it is, at about -18 or so, that's a good place. That'll give the sound person plenty of room to adjust the gain as they need on the show. Back to our amp. We got a pretty decent tone. I don't hate it. I'm actually going to back off a little bit on this gain. I think it's a little dirty. Beyond this point, it's really a matter of preference. You know, the things I'm going to do don't necessarily apply to every style or everybody's situation as far as their modeler is concerned. But this is what I like to do and what I feel gets me to where I want to be quickly. Almost every patch I ever use has a compressor strapped across the very end of this chain. Usually it's the LA Studio Comp in Helix. I chose the stereo version here before I started making any adjustments. Otherwise, you're going to have to do it again. I will have a stereo verb, maybe a stereo delay in this line. If you're only mono, obviously it doesn't matter. I'm just looking for a little bit, maybe 3 decibels or less of reduction. So obviously I've got a pretty decent volume boost going on here. And I'm going to watch my levels inside of Logic. I don't want it to be anywhere close to clipping in Logic, so plenty of headroom there. The makeup gain that I've got on there, 6.2, that's the stock makeup gain. I could go down from that if it was peaking, but that seems to be okay. That's all for that. That just gives me consistency between my patches and a little bit more juice at the end of the signal path. So stuff that I can't live without. Reverb. I want some verb. So I'm going to choose a stereo verb. I'll go for hot springs. I usually like the dwell a little longer and my mix down around 20%. All right, that's just a personal preference thing. Everybody's going to be different when it comes to verbs and delays and all that good stuff. The other thing I'll use is some kind of a gain pedal. I'm going to go with the Taming. The decent treble cut probably for the Strat sound and less gain. I'm going to go back and forth, turning that on and off. I don't want the level bump to be too much. All right, so to me that sounded pretty good. It's getting closer to the sound that's in my head. It's still a little bit harsh in these headphones. Now, I know these headphones are a little bit harsh. So I don't want to go messing with the amp settings too much or the speaker settings too much. Right before my LA comp that I've got at the end of my chain, I'm going to add a parametric EQ. This is another thing I do on almost every patch. The last 2 blocks I have are a parametric EQ and a compressor. This way, if I've got 5 or 6 patches in any given show that I'm working on, I can probably tailor the sound of those patches between the EQ and the compressor to the room, to the situation, without having to dive really deeply into the amps or the effects. So at this point, I'm going to kind of use all the tools at my disposal here. I'm going to use my ears, obviously, but I'm also going to use my eyes, and I'm going to check out this post Helix plug-in EQ to see what's happening to the sound, to see where the rises are, where the falls are, and I'm going to start on the neck. So there's a pretty decent amount of mid-range, all the way from below 1K up through 6K really. But that 1K, maybe 900 hertz, up to like 3.5K, that's the area that really I tend to find myself working on the most. So I'm going to go ahead in this parametric EQ and set my high frequency to about 2K. I'm just going to start moving the high gain fader. And find the frequency that's really annoying me. There it is, 2.5K. I'm going to bring it back to 0. Now the Q in Helix, if you bring it all the way down, you've got a wider bell curve. So I'm going to start all the way down, and I'm just going to shave off 1 dB. Did you notice what I did wrong? This EQ is mono. So now we're in stereo, and I got to do this again. High frequency, 2.5K. Drop my high Q all the way down, and kill. I'm going to go a little further this time, 1.2. Yeah, not too bad. Now on this parametric you have high and low cuts as well. I'm going to bring this down on the high cut side to around 7.5K. You don't have to do this. You're probably not creating any sound in the basic guitar tone that's much above that, but it makes me feel like we're taking care of any problems that might creep up there. On the low end, I like to set mine around 80 hertz, just to get rid of any rumble that might come from microphonic pickups. And you can actually see, if you look at the EQ, and I know it's a little bit small on the screen, the pre-EQ on top there, just below my picture, you got stuff down to 20 hertz. And if you go to the one that is below that, all that mess is gone. Maybe you love that. Maybe that's part of your sound. For me, I don't really want that in there. A low E resonates around 83 hertz or something like that. Not to say that the guitar itself doesn't make any noise below that. It certainly does, but in the context of a band situation, when you're all amplified, a lot of that stuff is getting lost anyway, so it's kind of inefficient to try to amplify it. So I'm pretty happy with that tone. I'm going to save that, and we're going to do a little experiment. So I'm just looking at these levels in Logic, and I feel like I can actually boost this gain a little bit more. I'm going to do that inside the compressor. So I'm going to make up gain a little bit hotter. I'm Now, I wouldn't use this to make sweeping changes. I wouldn't boost by another 5 dB or so. You're bringing up a lot of noise at that point. But just a little bit, I think. Yeah, let's save that again. So just for giggles, I'm going to compare the one that we just made. That's a neck. To another patch that I created earlier today. Different amp. This is the Stone Age 185. Let me kill the delay. Back to the one we just did. Now, obviously, they're different tones, but they're in the same neighborhood. And really, honestly, I've done this through a lot of different amps. No matter what I bring up, if I'm going for a clean Strat tone, it's not going to sound wildly different from those two. There'll be little characteristics of each amp in there, which is cool. That's kind of the whole point of having all these amps, I think. But I have a goal in mind for it. You know, there's a philosophy to building that patch, and there's a goal. I've already got an idea of what I want to hear. A lot of folks will sit down with presets and they'll be immediately disappointed, and that's normal. It's not the guitar it was built on. You're not the player that it was built around. So find yourself a philosophy. Find yourself a process that is repeatable and that you can start to refine for what it is you do. And I just think that, you know, helps us to be happier with all these fun tools that we have at our disposal. Thanks for watching, y'all, and happy playing.